I took part in knocking down Russian forces, was much more satisfying seizing their weapons, ammunition, and vehicles. Because you can't fight a war without bullets. Disgusting as the Russian rations are, you still have to have something to eat. And when they go out and they do these meat attacks, as they call them, these mass soldier suicide attacks, they've still got to have ammunition. And we've seen on the line where soldiers who were conscripted said that they were given 90 rounds of ammunition. Well, I carried 300 rounds. Okay, that's 10 M4 magazines before we got our Bren 2 rifles. 10 M4 magazines at a minimum per man. And when we couldn't get them from the Ukrainians, we bought our own magazines and we loaded up, and then we would take triple the amount of ammunition to resupply. That's because we intend to stay when we fight. The Russians, they send them out and they want them to die, but to die for that 1 meter. So, and how they're going to do that without resupply from these large scale depots is beyond me. But again, Ukraine has been striking some very strategic ammunition manufacturers with their Beaver drones. And if they would get permission from the United States to use some of their deeper range strikes, they could really, people make fun of destroying, logistics warehouses. Why aren't you out killing tanks or bombarding command posts? If you don't have a winter coat, it's really going to be unhealthy for you. But destroying their morale, destroying their ability to feed themselves, destroying their ability to, start looking at that magazine when you get to round number 28 and you're down to two, and you're scouring the dead bodies of your comrades for extra bullets. This is how you win a war.
Yeah, let's just expand on that a bit, because it's a point that I think often goes underplayed. The extent to which the Russian casualty rate is just enormous, and you could argue it's sustainable because they're managing just to chuck more men into the meat grinder as things
Right.
stand. But at some point, you would have thought Putin's going to have to do a new mobilization, and is that politically risky for him? But also, as you mentioned, Malcolm, the impact of some of these drone strikes on logistic hubs in Russia. Just expand a bit on that and the impact that's going to have in the long term for Russia.
Right. Well, I have to really take credit, give credit to the Ukrainian intelligence and the land warfare command. For one, thinking about Russia in a way that they understand. They understand Russia the way no NATO planner will ever understand them. They were part of the Soviet system. Their senior commanders were former Soviet officers. One guy that I one guy that I fought with was his call sign Samurai, a Ukrainian army soldier, was former Soviet Spetsnaz commando, right? Naval commando, then Ukrainian naval commando, then Ukrainian army reconnaissance officer. And he understood how they fight. And he'd say, you punch them in the face, they're going to fall back. And you say, okay, at a tactical level, that works. But how does it work over 2 years or 3 years? Ukraine smartly decided to play long ball with how this war was going to go. They were under no misimpression that every counteroffensive would be Kharkiv 22. That was a unique circumstance without the preparation of the battlefield that Russia did. Right after Kharkiv 22, Russia mined, put out obstacles, trench lined every line of that battlefront. So now you have a different war than the first 7 months of the war. You have a trench warfare network. You have anti-tank barrier network. You have the drones now have replaced mortars and hand grenades as the killing machines on the battlefield, and artillery in some respect. So as a strategic planner for, Ukrainian intelligence and their, armed forces command, you have to think, how does my enemy get artillery shells? Well, we saw that in 2023, Russia did suffer a starvation of artillery shells. But also in 2023, the counteroffensive that everyone felt disappointed with, right? I met Minister Reznikov, who was the defense minister at that time. Very interesting. He had never met an international legionnaire, even though he had thousands under his belt operationally. And he said, what you did before is going to be very different this year. This year, we're going to punch them everywhere. We're going to do body blows. And that was a smart strategy. But before they ever threw an armor assault, they spent almost 2 months killing every Russian artillery tube, every Russian artillery battery that they could find. And that's because when the war started, Russia had what we would call strategic, not even tactical or theater. They had strategic overmatch on artillery. And, some pundits say 12 to 1, 20 to 1 on rocket tubes, that all of these things that were in warehouses in the Soviet Union. Well, Ukraine had strategic overmatch as well. Ukraine had strategic overmatch in guts. And that's what sustained the Ukrainian army. They were well prepared for the Russians to invade. They spent weeks before the invasion on the battlefront taking out all of their war stocks. They understood artillery was coming. And they went on this massive campaign that lasted 2 months in 2023. If you went near an artillery battery, you were bombarded. They used U.S. counter battery fire radars, used their own drone system to gather real time visual intelligence. They have a very intense, real time, brigade level, persistent surveillance network of drones out there that to see everything, every movement. Marry that up with U.S. intelligence. From Defense Intelligence Agency or National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, all of the combined intelligence resources of NATO looking back into Russia. So when you go to these, and we have some excellent open source intelligence people who are looking at all of the warehouses and storage facilities of like every self-propelled gun in Russia and watching them being repaired and drawn out and sent to the front and then visually seeing them destroyed showed that Russia's logistics base, the nation itself, this isn't World War II with, little old ladies in Vladivostok packing, first aid kits that are going to the Murmansk front, right? Or the Kursk front against the Germans. This is not that. That nation has not mobilized for war because now they have money, they have a middle class, they have an opinion and the ability to influence government. They don't have to live in fear from a Joseph Stalin. So Ukraine understands that. And that means there will be one oligarch's factory that makes medical kits. There will be one or two that will stuff meals ready to eat, right? And then there will be two or three ammunition factories that make all of the ammunition for Russia. And if you can blow up those factories like they've hit the Tula ammunition factory, famous AK-47 ammunition factory, they've hit that, they haven't destroyed it. But one day we could wake up to that entire facility gone if Ukraine decides to do what they've done on some of these drone raids against the oil industry. They could launch 150 Beaver drones with 90% of them impacting. That's what we're seeing. So when they do that, when they take away the bullets, Russia has to scour the entire former Soviet Union warehouses and ammunition dumps and do what they've done off to the west. They've pulled everything off the Manchuria front. There is no equipment left in the Russian Asia front. If I were Japan, I would start thinking very seriously about maybe a day of imperialism and taking back the Sakhalin Islands. Or if I were China, I would start looking at Siberia as, the next Chinese province because, there's two drunk policemen and a camel out there protecting that. Everything else has moved to the Ukrainian front. Ukraine has so drained Russia that again, war is your willpower and your logistics power to sustain combat. Russia, I understand now, is spending 40% of its national budget on this war. And that means, okay, 30% are going into oligarchs' pockets. So what's happening is those bullets are not arriving on the Ukrainian front. Hopefully, the Ukrainians think that at some point there is a weak spot where they can break through. And Russia has, by doing their counterattack this spring, in the vicinity of Kharkiv and Volchansk. I have no idea what they're doing. I mean, I fought in that sector. And it was pretty easy for us to fight on ground that we had already taken. And now Russia has lost everything and lost tens of thousands of troops. So when people say, oh, it's a tactical victory is taking ground. Yes. Russia has achieved tactical victories down in the south this year in Avdiivka, Vovchansk, and Popovska, these areas. But just because you move 2 or 3 kilometers does not move the dial on the theater battle map on who could win this war. Well, Ukraine has also used another successful strategy we call head against anvil. And that's when you see Russia dedicate massive amounts of manpower to take a small city or a small town. Bakhmut, Severodonetsk, Avdiivka, all of these come up. And they lose 10,000 men dead, not wounded, right? 10,000 men dead, 20,000 men wounded, hundreds of tanks destroyed. And the Ukrainians have actually capitalized on this. They've turned it into an operational art that NATO strategists are going to be studying for decades. I mean, they have allowed Russia to literally destroy their own army for a kilometer. And that might look great to those Sovietologists, right? The Vladimir Putin, who grew up in the KGB in the Soviet Union, that they're doing the World War II, die for the motherland charges, but you're not doing anything on Ukraine. You're taking a kilometer of land. They're going to get back.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.